12 men arrested, 14 properties raided, one message sent loud and clear. December 10th, 2025. Sydney wakes to sirens and flashing lights as Australia's elite Raptor squad kicks down doors from Piermont to Razorback. The Hells Angels just learned that ignoring 30 warnings has consequences. This isn't just another bust. This is the culmination of a 5-month investigation into a beaky war that started with a hostile clubhouse takeover in the Hunter region. Stick around because what happened next reveals how Australian law enforcement is rewriting the rules on taking down organized crime. Connection loop. Before we dive into what went down that morning, you need to understand the powder keg that had been building since July. Because these arrests didn't happen in a vacuum. They were the direct result of one of the boldest moves in Australian bikie history, and what came after set the entire underworld on edge. The Gladiators takeover, where it all began. Wednesday, July 23rd, 2025. Maitland, New South Wales. The Gladiators Motorcycle Club, a group founded back in 1960, had held their territory in the Hunter region for over 6 decades. Then everything changed in one night. According to NSW Police reports, masked members of the Hells Angels stormed the Gladiators clubhouse in what investigators would later describe as a hostile takeover attempt. Underworld sources who spoke to media outlets revealed disturbing details. Everything inside was burned. Shots were fired. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't a negotiation or a friendly merger. This was a forced annexation of territory that the Gladiators had controlled since the club's founding more than 60 years earlier. Days later, the violence escalated dramatically. A burning vehicle was deliberately rammed into the Gladiators clubhouse, triggering a massive fire that could be seen from blocks away. Emergency services rushed to the scene, battling flames that threatened to spread to neighboring properties. A 63-year-old man sustained serious injuries in the attack, requiring hospitalization and weeks of recovery. The Hunter region, historically quiet in terms of bikie activity compared to Sydney or Melbourne, suddenly became ground zero for a turf war that would dominate headlines for months. But here's what makes this significant beyond the immediate violence. The Gladiators had operated in Maitland for decades without major conflict. They were considered a relatively low-profile club, focused on their local area without aspirations for major expansion or involvement in high-stakes criminal enterprises that attracted federal law enforcement attention. The Hells Angels, sensing an opportunity for expansion, saw the Hunter region as prime real estate. By August 2025, they'd announced plans for a new Hunter Crew chapter, signaling their intention to dominate the area permanently and establish control over criminal markets in the region. The Hunter region represents more than just another patch of territory in the complex geography of Australian organized crime. It sits strategically between Sydney and Queensland, controlling key transport corridors along the Pacific Highway and inland routes. For any organization involved in the drug trade, controlling the Hunter means controlling logistics between Australia's 2 largest drug markets. The region's ports, highways, and relative lack of law enforcement resources compared to major cities make it ideal for smuggling operations. The Hells Angels understood this geography perfectly, and they moved decisively to claim it before rivals could respond. Strike Force Benson. The police response. NSW Police didn't sit idle while this territorial expansion unfolded. In August 2025, State Crime Command's Raptor Squad established Strike Force Benson specifically to respond to the escalating tensions between the Hells Angels and Gladiators. The formation of this strike force signaled that law enforcement was taking the threat seriously and allocating significant resources to prevent further violence. Strike forces in NSW Police are temporary investigative units created to address specific criminal problems, and their creation indicates high-level approval and resource commitment.
The Raptor Squad has a reputation that precedes them throughout Australia's criminal underworld. Formed in 2015 to combat outlaw motorcycle gang activity, they use consorting laws, vehicle stops, property raids, and constant surveillance to disrupt bickie operations. They're not subtle. They're not meant to be. Their entire operational philosophy revolves around making life so difficult for gang members that the cost of membership outweighs the benefits. Raptor Squad officers are specially trained, equipped with extensive powers under various NSW laws, and operate with a mandate to use every legal tool available to dismantle organized crime networks. On Friday, August 1st, 2025, Raptor Squad officers issued 27 public safety orders against various gang members and associates. These orders prohibited them from attending the Maitland clubhouse following the takeover. The legal mechanism of public safety orders gives police extraordinary power to restrict where individuals can go and who they can associate with, based on reasonable belief that their presence poses a risk to public safety. Violation of a public safety order is a criminal offense carrying significant penalties. But public safety orders were just the beginning of the legal pressure campaign that would unfold over the following months. Throughout August, September, October, and November, Raptor Squad issued more than 30 consorting warnings to Hells Angels members across New South Wales. Under New South Wales law, these warnings are official notices that carry significant legal weight. Once warned, if members are caught associating with other convicted offenders on 2 or more occasions, they face criminal charges that can result in up to 3 years imprisonment and substantial fines. The warnings were clear, specific, documented. Each warning was served in person by uniformed police officers, explained in detail using plain language, and acknowledged by the recipient with a signature or witnessed refusal to sign. Police made sure every member understood exactly what they could and couldn't do. Officers explained that attending club meetings, riding in group rides, or even being photographed with other warned members at public locations would constitute consorting. But according to police statements and subsequent charges, the warnings were systematically ignored by members who believed their club loyalty superseded Australian law, or who calculated that the benefits of continued association outweighed the legal risks. The evidence builds. Raptor Squad investigators didn't just issue warnings and walk away hoping for compliance. They watched, they documented, they gathered evidence using every tool available to modern law enforcement in a democratic society. Surveillance teams followed targets across multiple jurisdictions, coordinating with police in other states when targets traveled. Undercover officers attended public events where gang members gathered, blending in with legitimate attendees while documenting who associated with whom. Intelligence analysts pored through social media posts, phone records obtained through legal warrants, and financial transactions looking for patterns that indicated continued criminal organization. Breaches of the consorting warnings were detected across multiple states: New South Wales, the Australian Capital Territory, South Australia, Victoria. Members were photographed and recorded consorting during national runs and at the Hells Angels 50th anniversary celebrations that marked 5 decades since the club established its first Australian chapter in Sydney. Every interaction was catalogued with dates, times, locations, and participant identities meticulously recorded in preparation for eventual prosecution. National runs are annual events where club members from different chapters ride together, often crossing state lines. These events typically last several days and involve hundreds of participants from across Australia and sometimes from international chapters. They draw massive police attention because they involve large gatherings of convicted offenders traveling in organized groups, often engaging in intimidation tactics against the general public by riding in formation and displaying their colors prominently.
The 50th anniversary celebrations were particularly significant from both a cultural and law enforcement perspective. Hells Angels chapters from across Australia converged in Sydney to mark 5 decades since the club established its presence down under in 1975. For the Hells Angels, this was a moment of pride and celebration, demonstrating their longevity and resilience despite decades of law enforcement pressure. For police, it was a target-rich environment for surveillance. Officers from multiple state and federal agencies coordinated their efforts, sharing intelligence in real time and documenting interactions that would later form the basis for dozens of charges, not just in this operation, but in future investigations. Every interaction was logged with precision that would stand up to legal scrutiny in court. Every gathering documented from multiple angles using both fixed and mobile surveillance cameras. Surveillance photos showed members eating together at restaurants, riding together in formation along highways, meeting at clubhouses and private residences. Phone intercepts obtained through judicial warrants revealed conversations planning these gatherings and coordinating attendance. Financial records showed purchases of travel and accommodation that corroborated other evidence. The case file grew thicker by the week, building toward a critical mass that would justify a major enforcement operation. December 10th. The raids begin 6 a.m. Wednesday, December 10th, 2025. Across Sydney, Raptor Squad officers, coordinated by the Operational Support Group and Intelligence Unit, moved simultaneously on 14 locations spanning from the inner city to outer suburbs. The timing was deliberate and based on decades of law enforcement experience. Early morning raids catch targets at home, often asleep, minimizing the risk of violent resistance or attempts to escape. The simultaneous execution across 14 locations prevents warning calls between targets that could allow evidence to be destroyed or suspects to flee. Piermont, Wentworth Point, Northmead, Emu Heights, Blacktown, Burwood, Razorback, Ambervale, Newtown. The locations spread across the metropolitan area from the inner city to the outer western suburbs and southern highlands, demonstrating the geographic reach of the Hells Angels Sydney operations and the comprehensive scope of the police response. This wasn't a targeted strike against a single chapter or cell. This was a coordinated effort to disrupt the entire Sydney network simultaneously. Let's break down what happened at each location based on official NSW police statements and subsequent court documents filed in various local courts. In Piermont, an upscale inner-city suburb known for its waterfront apartments and proximity to the Sydney CBD, officers arrested a 32-year-old man at one address and a 42-year-old man at a separate location. Both were charged with habitually consorting with convicted offenders after warning, indicating they'd been caught associating with other warned gang members on at least 2 documented occasions that police could prove in court. At Wentworth Point, another affluent waterfront suburb in Sydney's west, characterized by modern high-rise apartments and a relatively new development, a 34-year-old man was arrested. He faced both consorting charges and an additional charge of driving a motor vehicle during a disqualification period, suggesting prior driving offenses that had resulted in license suspension, but which he had ignored.
In Northmead, a middle-class suburb in Sydney's northwest with a mix of older detached homes and newer developments, officers took a 49-year-old man into custody on consorting charges. The arrest was executed without incident, with the target cooperating with police and being processed at the scene before transport to the station. At Emu Heights, located in the foothills of the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, where suburban development meets bushland, a 57-year-old man was arrested and charged. The suburban location suggested the Hells Angels' reach extended well beyond the urban core into regional areas that offered privacy and distance from heavy law enforcement presence. Blacktown saw multiple arrests throughout the morning at the local police station. A 29-year-old man, a 23-year-old man, and later a 27-year-old man, were all arrested at Blacktown Police Station on consorting charges. These individuals had either been brought in during traffic stops in the surrounding area or had reported to the station as required by bail conditions from previous offenses, not realizing they were about to be arrested on new charges. A 28-year-old man was arrested at Burwood Police Station in Sydney's Inner West. Again, this individual had either been brought in or had reported as required by existing bail conditions, walking into what became a carefully orchestrated arrest operation. In Razorback, a rural locality in the Southern Highlands south of Sydney, where properties are larger and neighbors more distant, police arrested a 33-year-old man who faced 3 separate charges, consorting with convicted offenders after warning. Failure to comply with a digital evidence access order direction, meaning he'd refused to provide passwords or access to electronic devices when legally required to do so under recent NSW legislation, and use of a prohibited weapon contrary to a prohibition order indicating he'd been found in possession of weapons despite a court order forbidding him from possessing them due to prior offenses. Another 33-year-old man was arrested in Ambervale, a suburb in the MacArthur region of southwestern Sydney, known for its working-class demographic and affordable housing, on consorting charges that police alleged were supported by photographic and witness evidence. In Newtown, an inner-city suburb known for its alternative culture, diverse population, and active nightlife scene, a 55-year-old man identified in media reports as Mamu Taipavalu was arrested and charged with consorting. Taipavalu's arrest garnered particular media attention due to his profile within the organization and his previous appearances in court on related matters. 12 men total, 11 arrested during the coordinated morning raids executed with military precision across Sydney, and 1/12th man arrested shortly after as the investigation continued to develop and additional evidence was processed, all charged with the same core offense, habitually consorting with convicted offenders after being officially warned not to do so under the laws of New South Wales. The legal framework. Consorting laws. Here's what makes these charges significant from both a legal and social perspective. Consorting laws in New South Wales are controversial but powerful tools in the fight against organized crime. Under Section 93X of the Crimes Act, it's an offense to habitually consort with convicted offenders after receiving an official police warning. Habitually means on 2 or more occasions within any period. The offense doesn't require proof of criminal activity during the consorting, only that the consorting occurred and was witnessed or documented by police or other credible witnesses. Critics argue these laws give police too much power and unfairly target certain groups, particularly members of ethnic communities and motorcycle clubs, who may associate for legitimate reasons such as family connections, cultural events, or rehabilitation support. Civil liberties organizations have challenged the laws as violations of freedom of association guaranteed under international human rights conventions. They argue that criminalizing mere association, rather than criminal conduct, represents government overreach and creates a system where police can effectively criminalize relationships without proving any actual harm. Supporters say they're essential tools for disrupting organized crime by breaking up the networks that enable criminal activity, preventing planning and coordination of offenses, and making membership in criminal organizations so legally risky that recruitment becomes difficult.
For the Hells Angels members arrested in December, the law was straightforward from the prosecution's perspective. They'd been warned multiple times. They'd been told in clear language that consorting with other convicted offenders would result in criminal charges. The police allege they ignored those warnings anyway, attending club events, national runs, and anniversary celebrations where they were photographed and documented, associating with dozens of other warned members. The maximum penalty under the law, 3 years imprisonment and a fine of 300 penalty units, which at current rates equals $33,000, a significant financial and custodial penalty designed to deter gang membership. The bail outcomes and court proceedings. Despite the serious charges, all 12 men were granted conditional bail by magistrates who heard their initial court appearances. Each was given a court date in January or February 2026 at various local courts across Sydney, including Burwood, Blacktown, Sutherland, and Parramatta local courts, depending on where they resided. Conditional bail means they can remain free in the community until their court appearances, but they must comply with specific conditions imposed by the court to manage the risk they pose. These conditions typically include reporting to police stations at regular intervals, such as daily or weekly, surrendering passports to prevent international travel that could make them fugitives, restrictions on traveling outside New South Wales without court permission, and prohibitions on contacting co-accused or attending certain locations, including clubhouses and gang-related events. The fact that all received bail despite serious charges tells us something important about the nature of the offenses. These weren't arrests for violent crimes, murder, armed robbery, or large-scale drug trafficking that would typically result in bail being refused as unacceptable risk to the community. They were arrests for association offenses designed to disrupt the organizational structure of the gang, rather than prosecute specific criminal acts that had directly harmed victims. Magistrates determined that with appropriate conditions, these men could be released while awaiting trial without posing unacceptable risk of reoffending or failing to appear. However, bail was not granted lightly or automatically. In the case of Ryan Sean Givney, whose defense lawyer argued the evidence was merely circumstantial, and that simply being near where the alleged offense occurred wasn't concrete proof of intentional consorting, Magistrate John McInnes ruled there was an unacceptable risk Givney would reoffend or fail to appear for trial. The magistrate noted in his ruling that Givney was currently on parole for drug trafficking offenses from 2018, demonstrating a pattern of criminal behavior that made him a flight risk and a danger to the community if released without strict conditions. The magistrate imposed stringent bail conditions, including daily reporting and electronic monitoring. The broader context: Hells Angels in Australia. To understand the significance of these arrests, you need to understand the Hells Angels' position in Australia's outlaw motorcycle gang landscape and their history in this country. The Hells Angels expanded to Australia in 1975, initially establishing chapters in Melbourne and Sydney after members of the club traveled from the United States to set up operations. Today, they have approximately 250 members across 14 chapters nationally, making them one of the smaller major clubs by raw numbers, but one of the most influential due to their international connections. They're part of Australia's Big Six bikie gangs, alongside the Comanchero, Mongols, Bandidos, Finks, and Rebels. But unlike the Rebels, who are the largest club with over 1,000 members across 29 chapters nationally, the Hells Angels operate differently. They're selective about membership, requiring prospects to prove themselves over extended probationary periods. They're international, with chapters in dozens of countries, providing networks for drug trafficking and money laundering. They carry the weight of the club's global reputation as the most famous outlaw motorcycle club in the world. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Corporation operates in 66 countries with over 6,000 members and 592 charters worldwide. When Australian chapters make strategic moves like the Hunter region expansion, they're backed by this international network that provides resources, expertise, and connections that smaller Australian-only clubs cannot match. The attempted takeover of Gladiators territory wasn't random or opportunistic. It was strategic and carefully planned. The Hunter region represents access to key transport routes between Sydney and Queensland, the two largest metropolitan areas and drug markets in Eastern Australia. Control of the area means control of logistics for drug trafficking, which means control of illicit markets worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The potential profits justified the risk of violent conflict and increased law enforcement attention. What this all means: December 10th, 2025 will be remembered as a significant date in Australian bikie history. not because of the number arrested or the specific charges laid, but because of what it represents about the evolution of law enforcement tactics in combating organized crime in democratic societies that must balance effective crime control with civil liberties. It represents the willingness to use association laws proactively rather than waiting for serious crimes to occur and then attempting to solve them after victims have been harmed. The coordination between intelligence units, operational squads, and multiple jurisdictions working seamlessly toward common goals. The patience to build cases over months through surveillance and documentation, rather than relying on reactive policing that responds to incidents after they occur. It represents the escalating conflict over territory in regional New South Wales. The Hells Angels' expansion ambitions into the Hunter region, driven by strategic calculation about control of drug trafficking routes. The Gladiators' struggle for survival against a much larger and more resourceful adversary, backed by international connections. The violence that erupts when these forces collide in contests over criminal marketplaces worth millions of dollars annually. And it represents an inflection point in Australian organized crime. The traditional model of outlaw motorcycle clubs operating openly with clubhouses, patches, and public runs faces increasing pressure from consorting laws, public safety orders, constant police surveillance, and sophisticated intelligence operations. Whether they adapt by going completely underground and abandoning visible markers of membership, dissolve into less organized criminal networks that are harder to target with these tactics, or transform into something else entirely, will define Australia's organized crime landscape for years to come. The 12 men arrested in Sydney are scheduled to appear in court in early 2026. Their cases will proceed through the legal system over many months, possibly years if they contest the charges and appeal convictions. Some will be convicted and sentenced to terms of imprisonment. Some may be acquitted if their lawyers successfully challenge the evidence or the application of the law. All will rejoin a changed underworld where the old rules of open operation and public defiance no longer apply, and the future remains deeply uncertain. The era of outlaw motorcycle clubs operating as they did in the 1970s and 80s is over. What comes next will be different, potentially more dangerous, and certainly more difficult for law enforcement to combat using traditional methods.